Welcome, everybody, to Beyond the Shadows. We have a great episode coming up for you tonight. American Ancient Sites of Power coming up next. Welcome back, everybody, to Beyond the Shadows. I'm author and ghost historian Mike Ricksecker. Have a fantastic show coming up for you tonight. American Ancient Sites of Power. Yes, they do exist. There is ancient history here in America, and we're also going to get into how these ancient cultures harnessed this energy that basically, the Earth's energy grid, that energy that wells up from the Earth's magnetic core. We were just talking about this sort of thing in our last show on Edge of the Rabbit Hole with Mark Anthony when we were talking about the Bermuda Triangle. We got into that sort of subject. We're going to be hitting that really hard here with American Ancient Sites of Power and even how it affects different things today, like different locations that we go and investigate as paranormal investigators, or may even affect the local area. But before we get into all of that, a couple things. First of all, this is our last broadcast until after Thanksgiving. So next week, which is Thanksgiving week, no broadcast from either Edge of the Rabbit Hole or Beyond the Shadows for our KGRA broadcast. If Bill needs those, I guess we'll get him some reruns. But we won't have any new broadcasts next week. And then also, of course, this episode of Beyond the Shadows brought to you by Haunted Road Roast. Helps you hunt ghosts. There we go. All right. That one was for Tim Schoen. Tim, hope you're feeling better this evening. All right. So, now that we're into November, we're in the home stretch of 2020. Did you guys check out the Haunted Presidents video on the Haunted Road Media YouTube channel? Yeah, I hope we're through all the election stuff by now. I know. It's been one thing after another with this year. But we're going to come out into 2021 and have a much better year. Right? Right. Okay. So just got to get through the next month and a half and we'll be good. All right. So American Ancient Sites of Power. This has been an interesting topic to me as I get further and further and further into my research in what I've been calling the connected universe. I was just a week and a half ago now out at, I was out in the Alton, Illinois area and doing some research there for the Shadow Dimension Project, with which many of you know is the docuseries that's going to be coming out here in a few months. Did the last bit of filming for that a week and a half ago. And so right now it's all in the post-production and all that great stuff. But while I was out there, one of the interesting things about that area there in Alton, of course, we're going to get into a bit of the Mineral Springs Hotel and all that, because many of you are well aware of all the investigations and work that's been done there. But right down the road, just really a few miles, come on up. There we go. Okay, it was a little slow here. Is Cahokia Mounds. I know those listening to the podcast are not going to be able to see this, but I'll try to describe it as best I can. What we're looking at here is basically the stairs. These are the stairs of the Monk's Mound of Cahokia Mounds. And this is the largest pyramid north of Mesoamerica. So it's the largest pyramid in the United States. Yes, we do have a few here. We actually have a number of different mound sites across the United States. We're going to get into several of these, and these are many of our ancient structures. Unfortunately, there's a plethora of them, scores of them, great number that have been plowed up into farmland, but we still have many of them left, and this happens to be one of them, Cahokia Mounds. And, it's a really, really interesting location. when you go there. Of course, this was, if you look at this is an aerial view, so you can actually get an idea of how big it actually is. And you can walk right up those stairs, go to the top of this mound. It was not a burial mound. It was actually a religious center, which a number of these mounds actually were. Some people, kind of get, I don't know, a little confused thinking that, you're climbing up in these mounds and, oh my God, you're on top of a burial mound. Like, no, the burial mounds that exist, you're not allowed to climb up. But mounds like this that were used as a temple site, yes, you're allowed to climb up to the top of them. That's okay. And there are a few of those like that here in our discussion this evening. So, yeah, Cahokia is very interesting. Go up to the top of there, and you can see for miles and miles around. You can see all the way to St. Louis, and you see the Gateway Arch from there, and all the tall buildings and everything. You can kind of look up the river toward Alton, because the Mississippi is right out there, and there's an interesting artist's rendition here. Let's get back to it, of the location when it was actually inhabited by the natives. So the area around here was originally settled around 600 A.D., but they didn't get into the mound building until about 1050 A.D. And it was flourished for several hundred years till about 1350 A.D., and then they abandoned it. What's interesting is that at about 1250 A.D., it actually, in this area here around the mound site, and kind of see the artist's interpretation of all the little huts and people's homes and what have you, it actually had a larger population at the time than London, England. This was a major metropolis, right here in America along the Mississippi. You can kind of see those that are watching the live stream up in the upper left-hand corner, that bigger river that's up there, that's the Mississippi. This is basically right along the Mississippi River, which is where Alton is. And so one of the things that I wanted to cover in the Shadow Dimension series, as we're going, because this is primarily about shadow activity, but why is it occurring? And I'm going to a number of different locations that may have portal activity. Mineral Springs is one of them, and Cahokia is right there along the Mississippi River, just like Alton is, just like Mineral Springs is. Why is it that they built this thing right there, this massive, massive mound structure? And as we dive deeper and deeper into these ancient sites like this, when we talk about, I'll start like Cahokia like this. We talk about the pyramids of Giza, or we talk about Stonehenge or Karnak, or any of these locations like that. These are sites that the ancients are trying to harness the Earth's energy, and so in a location like this, what's really fascinating is we talk about the water, Mississippi River, being a massive conductor of energy. Well, if we go a little bit north of Cahokia, we get into Alton there by Mineral Springs, you have the limestone bluffs. Again, the limestone, another fantastic conductor of energy. And then when we get into actual Mineral Springs Hotel, which we'll get to in here in just a moment, the actual mineral spring is still there in the basement of that hotel. So it's also interesting about that area that I dove into while I was there was the Piasaw Caves. And so this is like just north of Alton, another fantastic little location. Most people don't know about the parking lot. Is kind of like a stopping point for, well, bikers will go there. There was some crazy group of, it was some sort of Mustang GT club that they all had to have really loud engines. And there was like 4 of these guys that all came in, they met up, and then they drove out blaring the engines. It was like, seriously? Okay. But I guess that's a thing. But the actual caves themselves are pretty cool. And an opportunity that I had this time that I don't usually get is to actually take a peek inside. Usually, um, the fences are completely closed off, and you can just like kind of peer through them. But one of the doors was open, and so I actually got to go inside. And so here's one of these photos. And so again, a very interesting location that the indigenous peoples of the area use. Of course, you have the legend of the pie saw that's there with the it's kind of like the griffin with the antlers, and then these caves they use for a number of different reasons. Even the locals, when we get back to Mineral Springs, the Lure brothers would actually take meat into these caves because it was cool and to keep it cold and keep it refrigerated because they had their meat packing plant. And they would bring it up here before they actually built Mineral Springs. And so I think Quarantine Ghost shot me a question here. Yeah. Doesn't say who it's from. So maybe it's from QG. Uh, how does the alignment of the stars astrology affect these different sites of power? So many of them seem to have some type of association with the stars. Yeah, a lot of them are astronomically aligned. So we're going to get into some of that with some of these different locations here. Of course, a lot of them align with the rising or setting of the sun on the solstice. So a lot of them are keeping track of whether it's for ceremonial purposes. A lot of the hinges were used as calendars so that you would know, when to plant your crops and things like that. Others again were, for kind of ceremonial or magical purposes. But then there are some other alignments here that we're going to get into shortly that are quite interesting because some of them have to do with the afterlife as well in their beliefs, in where the soul goes after you pass away. So we'll get into some of that stuff with some of these different with some of these different sites. So sticking with Cahokia, we'll kind of close out this part here. And let's see, get into, there it is. Yeah, I think because I have so many photos here, it's acting a little slow. So I mentioned that the caves were used for keeping meat cool. So basically, with the Mineral Springs Hotel, the Lure brothers who owned the property were meat packers, and what they wanted to do was build an ice house because they had just been taking the meat up to the caves to keep it cool and then bringing it back down. And so they wanted something closer to their site with their meat packing plants. So on this particular site where the hotel is now, they dug into the ground. They dug a well to try to get the water so they can build an ice house. And they actually hit a natural mineral spring, which you couldn't really use for the ice. But since this was like around 1914, mineral water was huge at the time, so they were bottling it. They created a bottling plant down there, and then they built the hotel on top of it, which is what you see today. This actually goes down 5 levels. You can kind of see the extra levels along the back side of the hotel. You only see 2 from the street front. Now, what's interesting about this location, like I said, they still have the old spring in the ground. So you go down to the sub basement, there's a huge hole. They've thrown trash into it so that you don't fall into it. But when we were down there, I was down there with Coyote Chris Sutton a week and a half ago, and it was kind of sinking in further. It wasn't looking very good at all. So it's getting worse. But we're trying some different things down there. Like we're down there with dowsing rods and things like that, and the rods are pointing right at the cistern, the hole with the mineral spring, and Chris ended up doing, because he's a shaman, so he did some of his drum work down there as well. So the idea that this area does contain some sort of portal activity, that this is why the ancient Native Americans were so interested in this particular area, to be able to tap into this energy that's there. Building the Mounds of Cahokia, they got their there are caves that are up there, and then all kinds of sites up and down the river. Of course, you have the limestone bluffs there as well. So they're going to be extremely interested in this particular location, and there at the hotel, all kinds of paranormal and supernatural activity happening. To where I, witnessed the smoke morph in the shadow smoke morph into the apparition of the little girl. I don't know if Tom McNicholas is down there yet. He ended up seeing the little girl. There were 5 of us that did. It was a very interesting night. Of course, we've experienced many, many other things there as well. That was one of the more significant ones. And so part of the idea is to go there and try to get the portal activity working to see if we can experience something else. And we did experience some things there, which you'll have to wait until a few months from now when the series comes out to find out what happened. But yeah, so that's the idea, utilizing this natural energy that flows through the earth. And so that's one of the things with the Cahokia Mound that they were doing. That was their big temple mount. So okay, so a couple questions here. Betty Lange, do all the states have burial mounds? Wisconsin has a few. That's a great question. I mean, I haven't canvassed all 50 states to see if there are burial mounds. I mean, naturally, every state has people that have been buried. So the thing is that not all mounds are burial mounds. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at. There are many mounds out there that were not actually burial mounds, that they were actually used for to put buildings on top of. They had other purposes, mostly ceremonial. Like the tall one, the Monk's Mound at Cahokia, was again a temple site. We're going to check out Spiro Mounds here in just a moment. And that's another one in which the Brown Mound was a mound that was a temple site. Yes, there are burial mounds, but not all mounds are burial mounds. So I don't know. I'd have to look up to see if every state has a burial mound. But there are many. There are certainly many. I know Wisconsin does. Obviously, Illinois does. Ohio has a bunch. West Virginia. I mean, they are pretty widespread. Oklahoma, Alabama. There's a culture, especially up and down the Mississippi, in the ancient Mississippian culture, that were mound builders, and we'll just roll right into Spiro here in just a moment. And Adam Tillery, a comment here. I've got a theory that the ancient Welsh originally made the pie supper. It's interesting. Interesting idea. You'd have to shoot me some information on that. So, like I said, Spiro Mounds, another one from the Mississippian culture. If the mouse on my computer would work here properly. So we could shoot over here. And here we go. So, for those that are watching the live stream, there you go. The Spiro Mounds. This is some drone footage I took a couple years ago. And I guess it's a little hard to see in this, but basically where you see those spots of vegetation along this plain, those are the mounds. Again, a little hard to see here with the aerial footage. You can distinctly see what they call Brown Mound, and that's right dead in the center. That has the path completely circling it. One of the things I do want to note, since we're making a differentiation here between burial mounds and mounds that are not burial mounds, there's only one burial mound at Spiro Mounds, and none of these are that burial mound. The Brown Mound in the middle was a temple mount. And you can see cutting along the middle, you see kind of like a line that's been gouged into it right through the middle of it. That's actually a lawnmower path. They cut a line into it in order for people to actually walk up there. So they're actually encouraging it for you to walk up there. The burial mound, they do have one, and if you go down the hill, which is this path that leads to the bottom of the photograph, and it keeps going on a ways. It does lead to a burial mound, and this is it. And no, you are not allowed up on the burial mound. And what's sad about this, there are no burials really left in here. I mean, there may be a couple of remnants. What's sad is during the 1930s, there was a commercial company who came in. They bought the property, and they just started pillaging the burial mound and grabbing whatever valuables and artifacts had been in there. It was absolutely disgraceful. And finally, the state came in and stopped them from doing that, but it was pretty much too late. In order to make it look like it had once been, they kind of had to fill it back in and make it look like the mound it had once been. But it was extremely sad that they came in and did that. That they pillaged it essentially, and this was still, 1930s. We still have essentially grave robbers. And unfortunately, that's happened a lot over the millennia. There's many things that we don't know that we could have about ancient cultures, but don't because of grave robbers. So Sarah Yusuf, is it a common theme that most of those sites of power seem to be created by cultures that do not seem technologically able? Well, here's what I would say about that. In our eyes, they don't seem technologically able. But is that true that they weren't technologically able? Like, you take something like, the pyramids. Okay, how in the world did they do that? With those massive, massive blocks. Or some of these other sites like Baalbek that, we don't even have a crane now that would be able to lift those blocks. Does that mean they didn't have the technology then? I think they had the technology then. We just forgot what that technology was. We have a very narrow-sighted view of technology, that we seem to be rather high on ourselves, that we're, because we have computers, we have cell phones, we have all this, that this is, high technology, and we know better than all the cultures that ever came before us. And I don't think it works like that. I think what happens is, technology rises and we learn a lot of things, and then it falls. Like maybe there's a catastrophe, a disaster. We were talking earlier about about diseases, about viruses that were wiping out civilizations. We certainly know that during the Great Flood, that many civilizations were lost, and so they probably lost that technology that they had, their know-how. And I guess that's the thing. We use this term technology, this technology that they had. They had a high technology. It's not a high technology as in, the camera that I'm using here, or again, the computer or the cell phone. It's not high technology. It's a know-how on how to do different things. And so they had a know-how on how to build these different structures. They had a know-how on how to tap into this energy that we've lost over time. And because we took technology in a different direction, we didn't reacquire that knowledge that was lost. We just went a different direction, and it didn't even occur to us to look over here on how to do that. And so there are some things that we weren't able to do as readily as some of those ancient cultures. Like I said, we have cranes now, or we don't even have cranes now that could pick up some of these, massive blocks at Baalbek, or be able to how to, position some of these things like around the pyramids or other structures. And, you bring in engineers and they're looking at it like, I have no idea how they did it. Modern engineers looking at it, I have no idea. So it's just a different know-how that they had back then. Not that they didn't have technology. They just knew how to do things a different way that we lost. Okay. All right. So with Spiro, what's interesting about Spiro, and do I have it? I don't have it over here. Darn it. I thought I had it on the desk here. my pendulum. So let me go back to for those that are watching the live stream, I'll try to describe it as best I can for the podcast. So back here to the Brown Mound, was really, really fascinating about Spiro. Okay. So on a live paranormal investigation did a few years ago with a group there out of Arkansas. I was there for a conference, and they invited me for a nighttime investigation out there at Spiro. I was like, yeah, sure, I'd love to. And we're on top of the Brown Mountain. Now, I had been broadcasting the live stream fine, and we were still kind of out in the middle of nowhere, but I'd been broadcasting it fine until we got on top of the Brown Mound. Again, this is an ancient temple site. And we were on that path that they've cut into with the lawnmower, like right in the middle. And the broadcast kept cutting out, having all kinds of problems up there with the broadcast. And you can watch it on the Haunted Road Media YouTube channel. Just look up the Spiro Mounds live investigation. And I actually recently, just a couple of days ago, had somebody hit me up about that investigation, which is kind of ironic. But while that's all going on with the live feed, you can see a little bit of it in that video where I got out my pendulum and I'm trying to do a little pendulum work up there. And the pendulum's going crazy up there. So that was fascinating as well. That, okay, there's some sort of EMF interference up there because I can't get the broadcast to broadcast out properly, and then the pendulum's going nuts. Now, let me bring the photo back up again. When you come down that lawnmower path, there's the woods right there. So we went down that path into the woods because we thought we heard something coming out of the woods, probably an animal. We never did find what it was. But once I got into the woods, which is a lot more cover than on top of the mound, which is wide open, right? You can see that. It's the top of you're at the top of the mound. I should have better signal to, the towers and all of that, right? It's wide open. No. Terrible broadcast situation on the top of the mound. I got into the woods, which is down the hill, and then you're encompassed by all of these trees and everything. You'd think that would be a poorer broadcast location. Nope. Broadcast was clear as a bell. So there was definitely something going on the mound. Then we go back up on the mound. And, of course, the broadcast crapped back out. So certainly something was going on with the Brown Mound. Wait. But that's not all. So we did our investigation up there. We start going down the path, again, down the hill, toward the burial mound. Now, we're not allowed to investigate on top of the burial mound. We did a little work around there, and then further on down the path to a replica hut that's there. But as I approached the burial mound, again, the broadcast bombed out. And so there's something there about those mounds, that some sort of energy that they've tapped into that interferes with things like, a cell phone broadcast. And again, on top of the Brown Mound, I also had the interaction with the pendulum. So there's a lot there going on with the mounds. They knew how to harness that energy for their different purposes. And I don't think they're at that particular location that they're looking to, like some people speculate, that the pyramids of Giza were power plants. I don't think that's what they were trying to do at like Cahokia or Spiro Mounds or something like that. I think it was more of an energy for your body. Obviously, on top of the Brown Mound, it's a temple. Cahokia is a temple. They're using it for your, maybe healing. They could be doing it for healing purposes. There's a lot of speculation about that. Or for reaching different levels of consciousness, that by using that energy, you can enter into maybe some state of, euphoria that can, instead of using, because like some cultures, especially when you get down into like South America, will use hallucinogenics for that, like ayahuasca, things like that, to enter into a different state of consciousness, to interact with, the spirit realm and all that. But you could get the same sort of effect by harnessing that energy and using that energy into your body to enter into those different altered states of consciousness. And that's what a lot of these ceremonial type places are going to be doing, or like I said, perhaps the healing. So I'm getting buzzed here with some questions, so we'll take those. Donna Liska, ancient Egyptians along with the Atlanteans were very smart ahead of their time. Yeah, and there's a lot of speculation. Of course, it can't be proven. I hope one day we are able to prove it. We did talk a bit about Atlantis there with Mark Anthony. There's a lot of speculation that a number of these cultures around the world that we're aware of today came from Atlantis. Like perhaps the ancient Egyptians were originally Atlanteans, that when Atlantis was destroyed, that the peoples dispersed, and many of them came to Egypt, and that the Egyptians are actually Atlanteans. And that could be why when Plato went to Egypt and he got that story of Atlantis, it's because it was part of their history. Of course, we have no way to prove that now, because that story was in the library at Alexandria, and that's gone. So we can't corroborate, what Plato gained from Egypt with the original records in Egypt, because they're now gone. That's something that when we talk about the hidden room under the paw of the Sphinx, that's something people hope is down there. And there has been ground penetrating radar. There wasn't ground penetrating radar; it was the seismography, where they actually detected that was under the paw. Edgar Cayce had said it was there years and years and years ahead of that, but this basically confirmed it. But they won't allow anybody in there. But people speculate that it's like a hall of records, and that this would confirm that. We have no idea until we actually get down there, or maybe it's not there, maybe it's somewhere else that we haven't discovered yet. And that's one of the things that's fascinating, about this field, is that as the years go on, they keep finding more and more and more things. I don't know how many of you saw that recent documentary about Saqqara, but that was absolutely fascinating. It's just things like that I hope to stick around for a long time, because I hope that a lot of these questions get answered. For a long time they were saying that the Sphinx couldn't possibly be as old as some people are saying it is, like 10,000 years old or whatever, because there was no civilization back then, and nobody was building structures like that back then, or and then all of a sudden, Göbekli Tepe, and they did build structures like that 10,000 years ago. So it's really fascinating. All right, so we had some other questions. That was Donna's. Betty Lange, Mike, don't you think a good percentage of people using tech have no idea how powerful it is, just take it for granted? Well, yeah, I think that's true of at any point in time in our civilization. We take for granted now the different things that we have, until, of course, one day, if they're suddenly gone. Like if there was suddenly an EMP that would wipe out all of our electronic technology, would set us back, 150 years, we'd have a hard time, because we haven't retained our know-how in how to just, basic survival. So that would, we do take it for granted that we can just go to a store and we can buy our meat and produce and all that. If we were to lose that and fend for ourselves, that would basically make our world chaotic. So, from Alina, Mike, do you think that too much technology messes with us spiritually? That's a good question. Do we start forgetting that that there is a spirit realm, and whatever your belief is, if you believe in a higher power, you start forgetting. I believe in a higher power. You start forgetting that there's a higher power, and that do all the electronics become your god? Yeah, I certainly believe that that happens with people. That their god and the things that they worship are their material items, and the technology that they have, their cell phone or what. I mean, you see these people, like, they cannot possibly live at all without their cell phone. I mean, admittedly, I would have a hard time right now getting along without a computer. I mean, one, my day job is by computer, so that would make it extremely difficult to work my job. But just in everything that I do here with Edge of the Rabbit Hole, Beyond the Shadows, Haunted Road Media, all of that, is extensively computer driven. I can write without a computer. It'd be a lot slower. In some ways, I actually prefer writing by hand because that's kind of the way I grew up as a kid. But it's so much quicker using the computer. So, and then all the publishing, when you submit documents and things like that these days, it's all computer. So I would have a difficult time getting along without that. Now, that doesn't mess with me spiritually, but for some people it does. It does. So, all right, let's move along from Spiro, because that's was an interesting location. I had some interesting experiences. Now, all of this, Cahokia, Spiro, these are part of what we call the Mississippian culture. Another one that I'm going to briefly talk about is Moundville. And I haven't personally been there to Moundville. Now, these were all like around the same, kind of almost the same set of years. So what I mean by that, and I'll bring up Moundville here real quick. Like Cahokia, its basically reign of power was 1050 AD to 1350 AD. Spiro was 950 AD to 1450 AD. Moundville is 1000 AD to 1450 AD. So they all kind of lasted around the same number of years, around the same time frame. So that kind of 950 to 1450 AD, that chunk of 500 years there. And they all built similar structures here. So you can see here at Moundville, again, the various mounds and what have you. What's interesting about this location is that there are some tie-ins, and I forgot to add the photo, Michael. All right, I need to get the photo here. Or did I move it? No. All right, so let me add this real quick. Sorry to the podcast people. For those on the live stream, I'm going to add this here real quick. I just need to find it. Wow, what in the world did this do? It put me to a different location. That's kind of nuts. So, all right. Hang on, let's try this again. Again, I apologize, people. And because basically it's an artifact that was found there at Moundville that is important to their culture, but there are tie-ins to other cultures around the world. Okay. So this is the rattlesnake disc. The hand in the middle is a Mississippian culture depiction of Orion, the constellation of Orion, while the eye in the middle represents a portal in the sky. And it's through this portal that the souls of the deceased are supposed to travel on their way to the afterlife. Now, this is very, very similar in nature to the Egyptians. In ancient Egyptian culture, when there were 7 parts of the soul in the Egyptian culture, and a number of those parts of the soul would pass on to the constellation of Orion. There are other parts, two other parts, that the animating force that would stay here on Earth. One of those is the K-bit, the shadow, and we talk about that in some of the shadow person stuff. So there are some parallels here between the Egyptians and the Mississippian cultures. And I've talked before when we've talked about shadow people that there are some Native American beliefs as well in which they have multiple parts of the soul in their beliefs. And like I just said, with the Egyptians, they do as well. So it's kind of interesting to see how there are seemingly almost influences somehow from the Egyptian culture that filtered over here into America with our ancient Native American cultures. I'm not going to dive too deep into that because I haven't done enough study on that yet, but I will point you to a source right back here on my bookshelf. So Graham Hancock in America Before talks about a lot of this type of stuff, and I found it absolutely fascinating. So it's definitely it's a book that I recommend. But he noticed a lot of those parallels going to a number of these different sites around America, where it's like, hey, that kind of ties into a lot of the stuff that the ancient Egyptians believed. And it's truly fascinating how cultures that are supposed to have never met may have had some influences there. So you can kind of almost go back to the Atlanteans. When that civilization was destroyed, the survivors, did some of them end up over here in America? Yeah, we believe some of them ended up, perhaps they're in Egypt, other parts of, the Mediterranean basin. But did some of them end up out here in America? Maybe. It's quite possible. We're already seeing Adam Tillery's there watching Oak Island while he's watching us, and they're finding artifacts there on that island that predate what we previously believed was the discovery of America. And I'm not talking about Christopher Columbus. I'm talking about like even the Vikings and whatnot. And some of those artifacts predate even that. So what we think we know about ancient America, yeah, we're just scratching the surface here. There's a lot that we still don't know about who came here first and how this land was actually originally founded. So, all right. So that was Moundville. And there were other locations for the Mississippian culture. I'm not going to get into all of those. But again, you'll find the mounds in different locations around America. Those type of mounds. We're actually going to take a step back. We're going to take a step back. Again, earthworks, mounds, what have you. But we're actually going to step back into the Hopewell culture with the Great Circle Earthworks. And why is that not? Okay, there we go. So, kind of hard to see from this aerial drone shot, but vaguely you can see the opening there into the Great Circle Earthworks. This is in Newark, Ohio. It's just northeast of Columbus. You can kind of see on the right-hand side the circle wall, and then there's the opening, and it's hard to see the other part of it because of the trees. And here's another photo for you. This does not do it justice. These are actually quite tall. It just looks like a ditch and then a hill. But it's actually a very extensive wall. In fact, the Great Circle itself is 1,200 feet wide. It's massive, massive, massive. To give you an idea, here's basically the map of the area. So that Great Circle is there at the very bottom of this map of the area. Take a look at it. That is 1,200 feet across. 1,200 feet across. And look at the rest of the structures throughout. Okay, the Great Octagon over there is even bigger. These are massive, massive sites. Now, um, what is kind of sad in a way is that most of the earthworks there around Newark, now that the Great Circle is its own park. In fact, for a number of years, the locals, like in the 1800s, used the Great Circle as their fairgrounds. Go figure that. Um, but most of the other spots, the like the Octagon and all that, is actually part of a golf course now, which is kind of a shame. It's like, really, the earthworks are a golf course? It has, in a sense, helped to preserve it. If the golf course didn't come in, basically, it would have met the fate of a lot of these structures. Um, Ohio was loaded with all kinds of earthworks like this and mounds, and um, most of it was tilled under for farmland. You'll find that throughout the entire Midwest, that most of the earthworks and mound structures were tilled up and turned into farmland long, long ago, before you have any of these preservation societies that come in and like, oh, hey, stop, or like the state or federal come in and like, nope, you can't touch that. 150, 200 years ago, whatever, they're just, oh, it's good farmland. There's a mound or hill type thing over there. We'll just plow that right under. Yeah. So a lot of that stuff was lost, unfortunately. So the golf course, though, being there, actually prevented that from happening. But yeah, and then there's the idea that, wait a minute, this is an ancient structure and they're playing golf on it. Yeah, there's that. I know. What is really fascinating, though, okay, so this whole site, you guys have asked about like astronomical alignments and all that. These are astronomically aligned, and not just in the structure itself, but also, oh, and that's part of another. Did I forget? I forgot the other map. Okay. I was trying to get all this together before the show, of course, and I guess I just didn't get it all. Sorry about that. So High Bank Works is the other one. Now, the High Bank Works is another site in Ohio, but it's like more than 60 miles away from the Newark Earthworks. You can see it's the same type of design work. If you compare that with Newark, you can see octagon and circle. Great, we have octagon and circle. You see that, and this is just a part of the map. There's more structures there and what have you. So they're more than 60 miles apart, and they are oriented at precisely, or High Banks is oriented precisely at 90 degrees to that of the earthworks in Newark. So that's some amazing precision. That is absolutely amazing that this culture from, and we're talking like earlier, we're talking like around 100 to 400 AD, this ancient Native American culture. And we call the Hopewell, which is, that's not really what they were called. We don't know what they were called. Hopewell was just the last name of the guy that owned the property there in Newark. It was the Hopewell family that owned the property with the earthworks. But at 100, 400 AD, somehow two sites 60 miles apart, they are aligning perfectly at 90-degree angles. That's just crazy. You're talking earlier, asking earlier about high technology, or they had some sort of knowledge, some sort of know-how back then to be able to do something like that. I mean, yes, these days we could align something at 90-degree angles over 60 miles. Yeah. Did our European ancestors, I guess if you're from Europe, I don't know, or even some of our Asian ancestors or what have you, could they do that in 100 to 400 AD? I mean, the Romans were good. I don't know if over 60 miles they could align something perfectly at 90 degrees. It'd be tough. I know the Romans were great architects, but think about what they had here. I mean, these are earthworks, so we're talking like mud, mud and grass. But they did this. It's pretty amazing. All right. So I think there were a couple other questions that came in here. Um, yep. Sarah Youssef, do these sites of power line up with telluric lines or simply longitudinally? Okay, so that's a good question. Grab a little water here. So what ends up happening, because a common misnomer is calling the telluric currents ley lines. And so what they did, the ancients, is they built on the telluric currents. They knew where these currents were, especially when you had telluric currents that cross, and that's where some of these sites are, like the pyramids. The pyramids are like on one of those crossing points because there's a greater welling up of energy in that location when you have two of them that cross. And so they built on these currents. Well, over the years, what would happen is, okay, you'd have like a little, maybe it was a hinge, and then another culture came along and they built on top of where the hinge was, or there was a little temple that was there, and they built on top of the temple with like a church, and then a bigger church. And so over millennia, you had people building structures on top of structures on top of structures, utilizing the original temple or whatever was there, and incorporated that into their structure. You see that all over the world. And so over time, it was kind of forgotten why the original building was built there. But the original building was built there to tap into that telluric current, for that, again, like we were talking about before, for that, to reach a higher consciousness or alter state of reality, or for healing purposes. A lot of different reasons they would be tapping into it. And over the years, as one person would build here, one person would build there, one person would build there, we ended up noticing that they all lined up. And so that's what ended up becoming the ley line. So it ends up lining up because of that, but they were originally building on those spots to tap into the energy. Victoria Monday at Quarantine Ghost. During the Texas Revolution, burial mounds were created when the defenders were overtaken. Could heroes create a source of power, or does the land create the power site? Well, okay. So you have two different things there. So when we're talking about this type of stuff, we're mostly talking about, okay, for like an ancient site of power, we're mostly talking about tapping into like the Earth's energy grid, the telluric currents, all that, and be able to utilize that energy. As far as what you're talking about with a revolution, you're talking about a lot of bloodshed. That's a totally different type of energy. Now you're talking about energy that's been expelled in a very bloody fashion. That you're talking about death. You're talking about gore. You're talking about violence. So it's a release of energy in a very different way that the land will then have captured, whether it's in, if there are some buildings that have survived since that time, maybe that energy is becoming embedded in the building or into, maybe some of the surrounding rock structures or something like that, and then it continues to emanate that energy, or we're basically getting into stone tape theory here, and then we don't know what the catalyst is to be able to release that energy, and then we experience something supernatural, paranormal, or you just get like kind of the creepy, eerie vibe or what have you because of that. So these are really two different types of energy that we're talking about here. So, Betty Lang, you might, there's that belief that continents were connected ancient times, so that is why we're seeing similar builders. Yeah, Pangea, but that was like millions and millions and millions of years ago, you know, long before humans came around. So, um, you know, some of the similarities that we're seeing here now, you take 10,000, 20,000 years ago, there were still some differences in the world in that, um, you know, the ocean levels were different. So, you know, we have a lot of, uh, you know, ancient cities that are underwater right now because the water level's higher. You know, ever since the last ice age, of course, you know, more and more ice has been melting. Yeah, climate change is a thing. It's always existed. Um, and we've had peaks and valleys since that last ice age. You know, we go through warming trends, we go through cooling trends, we go through warming trends, we go through cooling trends. Um, you know, climate change happens. It has always been there. Um, and so at different times, you know, like the Bering Sea up there between Russia and Alaska. At one point, that was a land bridge, but that's not the only way that they came across, and that's kind of a misnomer in itself. That not all of the peoples that populated the Americas came across that land bridge and then filtered down, because they were finding that there are different DNA types down in South America that could not possibly exist if that had been the case, if they all filtered down that way. And that it appears that some people came across somehow, uh, by boat or raft or whatever they used to cross the seas back then. They found their ways across. You look at something like Easter Island. It it, uh, it seems to be that was an archipelago at one time. Now it's just one single island, but it was a much bigger area of land, and that was populated by apparently a culture from Asia or maybe even Indonesian. They came down toward Easter Island, and they even ended up filtering out into South America. So there's a lot of different ways that they came across. But when it was all one landmass, Pangea, that was like a long, long, long ago before humans even existed. So we're talking like dinosaur time. All right, so we're getting down toward the end here. There are a couple other things I wanted to cover real quick. They're at the Newark Earthworks. I did want to cover this story real quick. You guys saw the photo there for a brief second. This is what they call Eagle Mounds. It's kind of hard to see in this photo because you kind of just see a tree sticking up out of the middle and then these like little bumps. But from the air, it looks like an eagle. And again, we don't believe that's what they actually call it. It may not have even been in the shape of an eagle originally. The site is kind of, worn down. It may have been something else or like one big, mount in the middle for, again, maybe a temple or whatever. But when I was taking the overhead shots with the drone, I launched it off of the Eagle Mound. Here's the crazy thing about this. So I had a fully charged drone to take up there. Now my drone gets about 24 minutes of flight time. I didn't have it up there but about 3 or 5, maybe not even 5 minutes. And to get those, I got a couple of shots, a little bit of video, and then this photo here and one other photo, and then all of a sudden it started screaming at me. The drone, the handheld part of the drone which is basically my phone, started screaming at me that it was out of battery, and I had to bring it back down, launching it from the Eagle Mound right in the middle of the Great Circle. So again, you're looking at possibly some sort of magnetic field interfering with electronics, namely my drone. What in the world happened there that it affected my drone? The Eagle Mountain, again, we really don't know what it once had been. It's a lot of speculation. But it was something special, obviously, that they built right in the middle of this circle. And if it was somehow harnessing that earth energy, well, I think it affected my drone that day. Again, some people could just say it's speculation, but it is what it is. All right. One last place, and I'm being told by Quarantine Ghost that Tom McNicholas sent a super chat, which on the channel we don't have super chat enabled through YouTube yet, but we do have the link down there to do a PayPal super chat. So thank you very much, Tom, for donating a PayPal super chat. Absolutely appreciate that. So awesome. I think that's the first one we've had through PayPal like that. So I really do appreciate that. All right, and the last one I wanted to mention is Caco Canyon. This was a bucket list item of mine that I finally got to do almost exactly a year ago. In another week, it will have been a year that I went out to Caco Canyon. That was the Shockfest Film Festival in Las Vegas, and well, I met Nicole out there, and not for that reason. I was out there for Shockfest. She just also happened to be there, and on the way back, I stopped off at Caco Canyon, which was a bucket list item of mine. Again, it's one of these ancient sites that, when we talk about ancient America, keep in context what ancient is between here and, say, some of the other parts of the world. But this culture between 900 and 1150 AD, this is still considered sacred ancestral homeland to the Hopi and Pueblo. So there's some contention here about the Park Services operating out of this site. And I also do have to throw this out there. Like in my other video, I was calling them the Anasazi ruins because that's what I've always known them as. And I've always known the Anasazi to be the great ones from the past. We believe that the Hopi are descended from these peoples, but the current Hopi and others prefer these ancient peoples to be called ancestral Puebloans. I kind of got dinged on this on my video by somebody that the term Anasazi was actually a Navajo term meaning ancient enemies, not ancient ones. And so they don't like the term Anasazi anymore. That's the term I grew up with, so I don't know. In any case, the site itself is extremely interesting. Again, it's one of those that's astronomically aligned. They basically traveled out there to the desert to do their ceremonies. They only lived there for a very short period of time during the year, and they'd go back to their homeland. And you can see this is one of the great kivas where they would do their ceremonies, and there's still a lot of debate as to how this actually looked when it was fully formed. If there was a wooden top over a wooden roof, or was domed, or a lot of different theories and speculation. You can, and I don't have the overhead here. I'm not going to take the time to add it, but with the overhead, it was, again, astronomically aligned. They would talk about the star people, and that's what some of these petroglyphs are about, or concerning the star people. So of course the ancient alien guys are thinking that they're aliens and what have you. We don't know. And then you have the swirl here with some of these petroglyphs, and a lot of times the swirl petroglyphs are related to portals and energy. Again, choosing this site out in the desert, it's believed that they were harnessing through these great kivas the energy at that particular location. And I'll tell you, being out there, you do get that buzz that there is something special about that location. You can go out there and you can feel it. It's right there in the land, and they let you walk throughout that. You can't walk into every nook and cranny, but most of it you can walk through, and you certainly feel the energy out there. And they were doing something there to harness that with their different ceremonies and rituals. So, very, very interesting location. Highly recommend it. I can't dive too deep into it right now because we are basically out of time. I know it happens. So, there we go. Ancient Sites of Power in America. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Really do thank you for joining me this evening. This is our last broadcast, live broadcast until after Thanksgiving. We'll be back on December 1st. And again, thank you all very much for tuning in to Beyond the Shadows. All right. So let's get to the shout-outs, everybody. I want to thank Quarantine Ghost for haunting the chat down there. Always appreciate it. Whose birthday's coming up? Whose birthday's coming up? Yeah, Tom McNicholas had his birthday on the 6th, and what was that? I thought I saw a second one in here. Oh, Greg Rinkin, no more shows before my birthday. Okay, so happy birthday, Greg Rinkin, as well. Great, that's awesome. All right, so let's get to the participants tab here. We've got Betty Lange, Alina the Fam. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Hunterwood Media's Fairy Queen, thank you as well. There's Greg Renkin, Helen Espinosa, Mr. CO2, the Haglin, Tom McNicholas, Super Chat Superstar this evening. All right. Haven't had an opportunity to say that for a while because we haven't had monetization on the Edge of the Rabbit Hole channel yet. And Victoria Monday. I know Sarah Youssef was down there. She sent in a bunch of questions, as did Lena did, Betty Lange did, Donna Liska did. Thank you, Donna. All right. So I think that'll be about it. Let's see if there's anybody else that throws their name. I'll scroll through the list here real quick. Did I say the Haglin already? Well, I am now if I didn't before. All right. I think that's probably going to be about it. I know it gets late, especially here in the East. And all right. Oh, Auntie Coco stayed with us for a while. Okay, cool. And I know Adam Tillery was out here, so there we go. Yep, there's Adam. All right. I think that's going to do it, everybody. And then I'll give a shout out to Tim Schoen. Don't know if he's still watching, but I hope he's feeling better. All right, everybody. Again, December 1, we'll be coming back. Jessica Potter will be with us, Psychic Medium. And I don't know yet for the Beyond the Shadows topic, but we'll have a good time. All right. Take care, everybody, and have a happy Thanksgiving. Till next time.